World War II Army Air Corps veteran Hiram Hearn is out for some sunshine and fresh air. While he used to drive all over the country, nowadays his driving is limited to the neighborhood, but he takes it all in stride.
They won't let me drive anymore, and you wouldn't think that my age would have much to do with that, but I guess it does. I was born in Lebanon, Oregon in 1924. Lived all my life there. I'm 97. I've seen a lot of history.
The history of that generation meant growing up in the Great Depression.
Most people were pretty poor. Nobody had anything. They didn't have money to buy groceries. They had to take things they had, like eggs. If they had chickens, they'd take their eggs in and trade it for food.
Then came World War II, and high school graduation meant being drafted.
In the junior year, the government already told us that we were going to have to go before we're a senior. What I did is I volunteered for the service, and that let me stay there till I graduated. I didn't even get to go home. I went to graduation night. My dad had to bring all my stuff home, and I had to go right from class on a bus to Fort Lewis, Washington.
The U.S. was building the new B-24 heavy bomber as fast as possible, but they were being shot up and shot down at an alarming rate. Because Hiram had been studying electronics by correspondence since he was 16, the Army decided he was suited to help keep these bombers in the air.
They sent me to a large university where they had a B-24 bomber in the field out there, and they taught me all the electronic things that went on and how to repair anything on that B-24. They sent me to England, to a 8th Air Force base, where they gave me 7 B-24 bombers to maintain for the entire time of the war. I had a pretty good system, and I had a ledger book, and I kept track of every plane, and I knew what to do, and I learned which to do first. And all that work had to be done by 4 in the morning, and that's the time that they loaded up their bombs and fueled up their planes. I usually took a half hour off for dinner, and then I'd go right back and work, and I worked straight through till 4 o'clock in the morning. I had to stay there out on the field till 10:30 in case the plane come back with a motor feathered to start the engine. I'd dry the mags out and start the engine up and let them get back into formation. Once in a while, they only come back with one engine, and that's when my job began. They come back with flak holes all through it, and some of the flak holes went up through and cut all the wiring loose inside the plane, and they had to be all spliced.
The most vulnerable crew on the B-24s were the belly and tail gunners.
They come back hit pretty bad sometimes. They had old blood, and I have old blood, and when they got them out of the plane, they laid them on the ground, and they used a big microphone, and I could hear them for a long ways off, and to Hern, they said, "Get here immediately," and so I jumped my Jeep and run over there and jumped out of the Jeep and laid down beside them, and they'd take a hose out and took blood out of me right into them. Now, when I'd go to get up after it was all over, I'd pass out. They took a little bit too much blood each time, but it didn't bother me, really. I just did it and went back to work.
The average age of the bomber crews was only 21, and they depended on 18-year-old Hiram to make sure their planes were ready, safe, and mission-able.
We'd have to go around and look through the holes and see if there's any wiring behind it. if there was any wiring behind it, we'd have to go inside and splice the wiring. And if there was no wires behind it, you'd just cut a piece of aluminum and rivet it over the hole, and it'd be repaired. We had one plane in particular that the pilot worried about his plane, and just about every night after dinner, I'd go back to work and he'd come out to see if his plane is going to be fit to go out on a mission the next day. He'd look the plane all over. He was really a worrywart. And but I told him, I said, what time I get done with all this splicing the wires and everything, it'll be just as safe as before they got holes in it. And every night he'd come in and tell me about what happened that day and everything. And it was interesting for me, too, to find out what went on out where he was.
It was dangerous work in rain and ice conditions, especially on the high wings and fuselage, and Hiram was often in the crosshairs of enemy fighters.
Every day we kind of got scraped from German fighters. When I was out of the way and one come in, and the bullets, when they shoot out, it's like getting a flat rock and skiffing that rock across a creek or something. Them bullets do the same thing. They'll come down, hit the ground, and then they bounce about a dozen times, and you'll see them coming because they're 50-millimeter shells. And so you got time to step sideways. Very little time.
Tuesday, May 8, 1945, started like every other day for the last 18 months.
It come over a loudspeaker, and it said, "The war is over, and pack up your stuff."
And within a couple of days, Hiram was boarding a ship for home. He went back home to Lebanon, Oregon, where he expected to resume life as a 20-year-old. And then a completely chance meeting happened.
At that time, the Strawberry Fair was coming on, the Lebanon Strawberry Fair that had the world's largest strawberry shortcake. These two girls walked up and stood in front of us, and I said hello, and they turned around and said hello, and got to talking, and I asked them if they'd like to have a hamburger. I'm getting hungry, I said, and yeah.
About a year and a half later, Hiram and Bonnie were married.
From that time on, we lived happily.
They started a family and began raising two beautiful girls. Lebanon, Oregon was a thriving lumber town, and many of the men worked in the industry. But Hiram had developed some health problems since the war, along with some serious hearing loss from working around the roaring engines.
I had trouble. I had trouble breathing and stuff, and I'd pass out at times, and so I couldn't go to work in mills or factories or anything like that. And they finally decided that I could be a barber. So that's what I did for 55 years. It gave me a very good retirement, yeah. That's the first thing I'd do if I had to do over again. I'd find me a barber shop. That's the best deal I ever had in my life.
By the time Hiram retired his barber shop in 2013, he was 89 years old and had been married to Bonnie 66 years.
I've had more fun with my wife just traveling. We traveled across the United States 3 times.
In 2015, at 91 years old, Hiram had a chance to go on one of the last ever World War II honor flights to Washington, D.C. When Bonnie's declining health prevented her from going, daughter Kathy jumped at the chance.
She just said, "I can't go, would you want to go?" And I just remember, I thought, yeah, I'll do that in a heartbeat, I'd love it. So I went with Dad, and I think it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I'll never forget Dad. We'd go in the airport and people would just be clapping and cheering. And I mean, we're talking not a few people, we're talking like some airports, there was probably hundreds of people there. And I remember one time Dad turned around and he goes, "What are all these people doing here?" I went, "Oh my gosh, Dad, they're honoring you guys for all your work." It was so precious. I loved going with them. It was great.
When Bonnie passed in 2018, Hiram and Bonnie had been married 71 years. Nowadays, Hiram lives with Kathy, and Kathy says she loves caring for her dad.
I think he's one of the most loyal and honest people I've ever met. Very, very loyal, very an honorable man.
If you happen to be in the neighborhood and see Hiram out for a drive, stop and say hello. He might just have some history to share.